Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about the step LFO feature in the Roland Fantom O. You can follow along by clicking on the A056 scene. Now if we press the keys in this range, you can hear an LFO being applied that's not a consistent LFO. It's changing value with each individual step. So this is being achieved by the step LFO. So not with an arpeggiator, not with anything that's programmed into a song or a sample. It's simply just a step LFO. So there's a lot of flexibility with being able to use this feature. So what we're going to do first is I want to go to zone view and I want to take a look at what we've got here. So if we press the key, you can see it's in this range, it's triggering down here. Let's go in this key range. So this is where that robotic sound with the step LFO is being applied. It's in zone number 2. So what I want to do is I want to go into our zones and I want to mute out all of them except number 2, and then I want to go to zone select and press number 2. Now alternatively we could have just clicked on zone number 2 there. So now we've got this isolated, so no other sounds are playing, no other LFOs are being applied anywhere to confuse us. And then also I want to set the total key range to be the full range of the keyboard, so that's going to allow me to trigger that sound anywhere on the keyboard. It gives us a little bit more flexibility in where I'm playing the keys, and then it also ensures that we don't hear silence, because if I was outside of that key range it wouldn't trigger the sound at all. And this is covered in the previous video where we're talking about key ranges. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, let's click on the menu button and then we're going to go to tone edit. And so we can scroll down. You may be at the top here at the structure or any one of these, but as we scroll down, let's click on the LFO 1 or the step LFO 1 tab. And then so this is where you can change the individual steps for this step LFO. And so by the way, there's 2 step LFOs. You can use both of them or one at a time. This one is actually using step LFO 2 at the same time that it's using step LFO 1. So it's controlling one parameter with step LFO 1 and it's controlling another parameter with step LFO 2. It's a little bit confusing, and I believe what they're doing is they're controlling the pitch with one of the LFOs, and then they're controlling filtering with the second LFO. We can confirm this by clicking on the LFO destination. And so there you can see, yep, they've got some filter depth and amplitude depth assigned there. And then for LFO 1, there's pitch depth that's being applied there. So you could remove these depth values. Well, if we set these to 0, and let me make sure I'm clicking on the right ones here. If we set these to 0, and then of course the step LFO isn't changing any of the value of the sound. It's just constant. So let's move this pitch depth back in there. So that's changing the pitch. So it's almost like changing the note value if you were sequencing. It's kind of the same thing. And then this one's changing filter depth. So let's hear that. So it's cutting off some of the notes and then allowing some of those to be filtered. So that's pretty creative to kind of have those both going in tandem. Let's go ahead and move this back to what it was. I forget exactly where it was at, but I think if I put it kind of back into this range, we'll hear it again like it sounded. Yeah, that's close enough. So now let's go to the step LFO. So this is where you're changing what the individual steps are controlling. So here it was controlling pitch depth, here it was controlling filter depth. And now if we click on the actual step LFOs, we can change how the steps are assigned. So you can change the number of steps. Right now this one's set to 16, but you could decrease that all the way to only 1 step. And then for each position, you have a location here. So this one's located in position 1, and then you can change that all the way to 16. So why would you change the locations? Because on the individual locations, that's where you're going to change the depth. So you could make the value there be a lot lower or a lot higher. Now 0 is in the middle, of course. And then in addition to the value, you can also change the curve or the individual step shape. So if we cycle through these, you can have multiple pulses within one step, multiple sawtooths or individual sawtooths, and also change the directions of these waveforms in there. Okay, so next we're talking about the timing of these, so the speed of these. So this one's set to be synced to the BPM or the tempo that's recorded in with this scene, and then its rate is set to be 1/16th note. So 1/16th, the length of the measure, is each one of these steps. Now you can change this rate. Right now it's set to 16th, and we'll hear this. But we could make it be something slower, like we could make it be 1/8. And in addition to that, if you turn the sync off, then it gives you a numerical value. And so this goes all the way up to 1023. We can have it around 700, and it sounds very similar. But we could slow this down quite a bit. And most of the time you're going to have that set to tempo sync. The reason for that is whenever you have these LFOs and they're changing at a certain rate, it kind of adds a certain rhythm to a song that you're working with. And most of the time you want rhythms and percussive type changes or note changes or value changes to kind of line up with your tempo, and that will kind of make more musical sense. Another parameter here is the key trigger switch. All this does is when it's on, it means the instant you press the key, it's going to start the cycle after that moment in time. And if you turn this to off, then it's almost like this is running in the background, and then depending on where you press the key, you may pick up the pattern somewhere in the middle. You don't necessarily start at the beginning. So most of the time you would leave that to on as well. And then if you go into step LFO 2, all the same parameters are there, same positions and everything like that. Now there is one thing that I want to kind of cover here. I haven't talked about this too much, but most of these zones have an individual tone, and then most of the tones actually consist of multiple partials. So you can think of partials as being multiple oscillators. So if we go up here to, or actually let's leave this here, to step LFO, you can see at the top there's tabs for partial 2, 3, and 4. So those are turned off, but you could turn these on, and then you can go to where you're working with these partials. You're like changing parameters for this partials. So partial 1, for example, can have the LFO applied to it, and then partial 2 may not have the LFO applied to it. Most of the time the reason these have multiple partials is to kind of thicken up a sound. So an individual oscillator actually doesn't have all the harmonics that normal acoustic instruments sound. So even like for keyboard sounds, like just a simple sine wave, you don't normally get like a thickened up sound unless you start adding in layers of partials on top of one another. And we can get into that in later videos, but I just wanted you to know that it's easy to kind of get off track if you don't understand what these partials mean. So in addition to that, these partials, we'll talk about this in later videos too, but any one of these sections has the ability to where you can be editing additional partials, and you can have those additional partials cut on and off for each one of these tone edits. So just keep that in mind there for now. And this concludes the step LFO edit features in the Roland Fantom.